Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Model Your Way to a Million, with your MAPS coach, Chris Suarez. Please note this webinar is being recorded, and you will automatically receive the webinar recording. If you have questions for your coach, please type them into the questions box located in your webinar taskbar. Following the webinar, if you have any questions about today's call or coaching programs, please email us at fasttrack@kw.com. That's fasttrack@kw.com. That's all for me. Chris, take it away.
Awesome. Well, thanks for the introduction, Holly, and looking forward to spending a bit of time this afternoon with everyone. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day and lives and businesses to really look at this topic of modeling your way to a million. Now, here's what I'll share with you. My goal today is to just get us to think differently about a book that we all have. Right? It's the Red Book. It's the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book that Gary Keller wrote with some partners, over a decade ago now. And here's what we have found. We all have the book. We all believe that it can change the trajectory of our business or help us build a better business. And it isn't the easiest thing to do. In fact, I'll raise my hand as guilty that I had the book for 6, 7, maybe 8 years before I ever sat down and committed to following it without being creative. And today, my goal is to just get us to look at the beginning portion of that and how do we jump into that, or why would we jump into that? I think it starts with this quote on page 22 of MREA, one of my favorite quotes in the book, and that's because I like to keep things simple, and so does Gary Keller. And he said that there are going to be 3 things that stand between us and success in this business. 3 things. And they're there on the screen in front of you. The first is our approach. And the reality is we can change that today, right? We can change that overnight. My goal in our MAPS Fast Track program is over the course of 10 weeks, we completely and radically change our approach to how we've been building our business. Now, the second thing Gary says will cause success or lead to success in this business is our ability. And again, ability can change overnight, right? Ability, right? We can change that today. My goal in 10 weeks is to get us to really look at our ability and increase our ability at running a business. And the third word, I can't do anything about for you. It's willingness, right? Gary said the 3 things that'll stand between us and success. It's approach, ability, and willingness. See, the first 2, easy. The first 2 in 10 weeks, we can handle that. The last one is our willingness. And each of us will decide whether or not we're willing to do the work, as he says, of real estate sales agents. I would say, are we willing to do the work of a business owner in this industry? Now, why aren't we? Right? Or why haven't we been up to this point, right? The majority of us struggle with MREA, struggle with building the business. Well, we can find that on page 26 of MREA, right? Gary said that the problem is ultimately we just add complexity to our lives. We have complicated this industry and our business, right? There are lots of complicated parts of our business, right? Finding a client, complicated. Lead generation, complicated, right? Contract to close, complicated. Marketing is a complicated conversation. Database is a complicated conversation. Tracking gets super complicated. Yet Gary on page 26 of MREA says, no one can live in complexity for very long. Lasting success always lies in our ability to reduce things to their simplest form. He often says in our mastermind group that the biggest business opportunity for anybody in any industry is taking a complex problem and creating a simple solution. Well, go back and after struggling with building a business for 6, 7, 8 years, and I committed to following the model, following MREA, removed all creativity and just said, hey, I'm going to open this book and page by page, I'm going to do it. 3 years later, we net $1 million, right? 3 years later, we net $1 million. And to be fair, every year since then, we've net $1 million plus in our business. Now, what I realized is somewhere along the line in the first decade of my career, I had made it super complicated, probably much like many of you. And I remember going to Diana Kokoska and I went to Tony and I said, listen, we have this book, we have this model, we have the tools, all the systems are here. We just need a simpler way to understand it, to implement it, to have a conversation around it. And that's where this Model Your Way to a Million was born. It was a way for us to take everything out of the pages of this book, put it in simple terms on paper and into a program where over the course of 10 weeks we can step by step build the systems, tools, and models into our business. In fact, it brings up that very question, right? What is modeling? The fact is oftentimes even that word, right? You look at that picture on your screen and we call people models. Why? Well, because we look at that person and say, well, I want to look like them. That's a whole nother conversation. But the fact is, we think, well, great, I'll put on that suit or that dress and then I'll look like them. And then we realize, no, not quite. Then we say, okay, I'll get my hair done like them and then I'll look like them. No, not quite. Okay, well, I'll stop eating and then I'll look like them. No, not quite. The fact is modeling is not as easy as we think it should be. Yet Gary Keller says modeling is the pathway to excellence. In fact, on page 35 and 36 of MREA, Gary said, gosh, one of the books that changed his perspective on business and ultimately his life was Tony Robbins' book, Unlimited Power. Now, on page 35 and 36, Gary actually quotes Tony Robbins. The three quotes are there, and these are pretty influential quotes. These are game-changing quotes, and here's why. Gary pulled a quote out, and Tony Robbins said this, that long ago he realized that success leaves clues, right? That people who produce outstanding results do specific things to create specific results. Specific things, specific results, right? We'll look around our industry and say, gosh, I want a business like that, or I want his business or her business. And the fact is, we want the specific results, but we haven't done the heavy lifting of figuring out what specific things did they do. Second quote was, actions are the source of all results. Well, that's trouble, right? By nature of the fact that, gosh, in order to get them, we have to be willing to act. And that's one of the 9 ways that the MREA thinks, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Are you willing to act? And then the third part is difficult for many of us, right? Many of us have been raised to not ask questions. Many of us have been raised to take care of ourselves, to do it on our own, to put your head down, get to work, right? Don't ask for help. Yet Tony Robbins on page 36 of MREA says to model excellence, we need to be a detective. We need to be an investigator. We need to be someone who asks lots of questions. Well, I'll raise my hand and say, gosh, that wasn't me. The good news is, well, Gary did that for us. Gary went out into the industry and interviewed hundreds of agents, top agents from all over the country, all different towns, cities, brokerages, and said, gosh, you are highly successful. What have you done? And Gary said that MREA is the Frankenstein of best practices. So these were the tried, tested strategies, models, tools, and systems of people that actually had specific results. And Gary said, great, specifically tell me what you did. Now, if you're like me, you open up the book and turn to page 129, and that's because that's the page that the models start. Like hey, let's get to work. Tactically, what do I need to do? And what I found out very quickly when I committed to MREA, that it doesn't start there. Well, the book starts in page 1, right? We know the 4 models. It starts with the economic model, goes to a lead generation model. We need a budget model and an organizational model. But what I missed was the first 129 pages of real estate, which was the mindset model. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. In fact, I call it the 5th model. We do some heavy lifting in our 10-week program about making sure that before we ever begin, before we look at our approach and ability, we are willing to question how we think. Gary found in his interviews that there were 9 ways the top agents thought. The first 2 are foundational. It's think powered by a big why and think big goals and big models. If we nail those 2, and we go through actual tactical processes to question our thinking, to make sure that we understand what that big why is, and then set some big goals and understand what big models we need. If we get the first 2, Gary says the next 7 are just supportive of the first two foundational. So think possibilities, think action. Number 4, like we just mentioned, think without fear, think progress, think competitively and strategically. And 2 of my favorites is think standards and think service. And here's why. Because oftentimes we say, gosh, even by nature, the name of our course, Model Your Way to a Million, we think, nah, I don't really care. Like, I don't have to make a million. That's not my goal. That's not where I want to be. In fact, some of us tell ourselves that, well, I don't want to get too big anyway, because then my standards will drop or my service will drop. But here's what's interesting about that. As Gary interviewed agents, top agents doing hundreds of transactions, they had the best standards and the best service if they followed the model, right? The budget model, in fact, will force you into increasing and improving your standards and service. Why? Because if we spend and invest our money where we should, where the model tells us to, well, gosh, the bigger we get, the bigger competitive advantage you will have, as long as you maintain the mindset of thinking standards and thinking service. And we'll go through those, and we'll talk about how to institute standards and service into our business while tackling the other 9, right, or the other 7, I guess the total 9 ways the MREA thinks. Now, here's what's also interesting about that. There's a difference between thinking and perspective. Thinking and perspective is different, and here's why. Because our perspective is harder to change. Unfortunately, our perspective comes from how we were raised, right? Our background, the experiences we have in life, and that shapes our perspective. Many of you who have heard me teach MREA before have probably heard me kind of explain this by just looking at raising kids. Probably half of us have kids and half of us don't on this call right now. But regardless, we all have a perspective on how to raise them. How do we know that? And where does that come from? Well, it comes from how we were raised. I'll tell you, my wife and I have very different perspectives on how to raise kids. And if we were going to do that successfully together, we had to actually have the same perspective on how they should be raised, which was a blend of how I came to the table and how she came to the table. But even if you don't have kids, I promise you have a perspective. Just think about this, right? So if you're single, you somehow, right, you lock up the best date you've ever been on. You are super excited. So you plan this date out. You pick the fanciest restaurant. You get the nicest wine. You are ready. Like, this restaurant is awesome. And you get the best table in the restaurant for 2. About 10 minutes into that date, in walks a family of 8. They get sat right next to you. That means 2 adults, 6 children running around, chasing each other, throwing food. I know how it goes. I have a couple kids. And you think to yourself, I know exactly how those kids need to be raised. You have a perspective on how they should be raised. Well, there is a perspective. In fact, there are 6 of them that we need to have if we're going to have a big business. These 6 personal perspectives were foundational for me to change the trajectory of our business. And I would argue that 2 of them that we'll deep dive into together in our course, 2 of them were the secret to our business's success. Really committing to the 80-20 principle and moving from being entrepreneurial to being purposeful. Just 2 of the 6, but incredibly powerful. So you get your mindset right, you get your perspective right, and you say, great, let's start, let's jump in. Not yet. Not yet, because oftentimes we forget about this really, really important section on page 107 and 108 of MREA. In fact, as I travel around and I ask people, hey, what are those 8 goal categories of MREA? Trouble is, most of us don't know what those 8 are. Don't worry, they're right on page 109, so you can run to your books and grab them. But interestingly enough, if we don't have systems and models around how to track them, when to track them, where that should show up, nothing later in our business will work. We won't be able to make good budget decisions. We won't be able to make good business decisions and growth decisions, or even hiring decisions. We need to know those 8 goal categories, and we will spend some time placing systems around leads, listings, contracts written, contracts closed, money, people, systems and tools, and personal education or growth. 8 goal categories of MREA. If we don't have a system for them, please sign up for the course. Interestingly enough, even even halfway through us netting $1 million, I realized that, man, I had systems for 6 of those goal categories, but not total of 8. And as I implemented all 8, sure enough, I saw the business grow. Now, one of my favorite sections of the book, and I think it's probably one of my favorite sections, is because I missed it for the first few times. In fact, this will be the 17th time I teach Model Your Way to $1 million. So I'm slightly warmed up, guys. I'm ready to go. But page 68 and 69 of MREA, if there are 2 pages that I ask you to go back and read, whether you sign up for the course or not, whether you read the book or not, whether you think, Chris, I don't even like MREA or not, please do me a favor and read page 68 and 69 and throw in page 70, those 3 pages. And this is the section that for some reason I missed probably the first 5 or 6 times through the book. I don't know why, right? Different place, different time, but work to learn and work to earn. Gary Keller believes that if we internalize this, our industry would change. Why? Well, we're a work to earn industry. It just is what it is. Most of us don't show up here. Most of us on this call aren't independently wealthy. We didn't show up one day and just have a lot of money and think, well, I got enough money to live, so what do? There are a lot of people in that real estate office. I like people. I'll go to work there. No, we showed up because we needed to earn money. We wanted to support our family. We wanted to build an experiential life, right? So what do? In about 30 days flat, we get our license, right? We spent about 30 days, right? 40 days, maybe 2 months, maybe a few months, but I've seen it done in a couple weeks. And in a couple weeks, we earn the right to go out and practice real estate. And what happens? We figure out how to work with a buyer because that's pretty simple, or we figure out how to convince a seller to list with us because that's pretty simple. And we make the biggest check we've ever made. And all we know is that was awesome. Now I'm going to repeat it, right? And it's this rinse and repeat cycle that we're on, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And we form these habits on how to run our business or how to earn money. And yet you look at any other industry, you look at doctors or accountants or lawyers, and man, they have a work to learn phase, right? Doctors have a 12-year work to learn phase. They go to undergrad and then grad school and then medical school and then have a residency. It is 12 years before they get to the right to practice medicine and actually earn $1 in practicing medicine. Gary believes that if we spent some time working to learn, right? He believes that if we had an associate's or a bachelor's degree on MREA, then exponentially our earnings would change. Well, we created Model Your Way to $1 million to be that degree in running a real estate business. He wrote the book. We just looked for a simpler way to make sure that we were delivering it. So let's just briefly go through those models. The first one, right, the economic model, right? This is where we set goals. This is where we set our income goal. This is where actually our income goal informs us what we need to do. On your screen, if you're on a computer, you'll see, hey, if I wanted to net $1 million and my average sales price was 300,000 and my commission was 3% and my conversion ratios were built in, go back to your 8 goal categories. You won't know those ratios unless you track them. That's why we figure out a way to do that. The economic model informs us exactly how many appointments we need to go on. I know in order to net $1 million with those sort of parameters, I need to go on 21 listing appointments and 21 buyer appointments, right? 42 appointments a month my team or my organization needs to go on. That's pretty simple. Great, we're going to build that out. We're going to understand that economic model forward and backwards. We're going to talk about what business decisions we make and how that affects your conversion ratio, right? From listing appointment to listing taken to listing sold. We'll talk about buyer broker agreements and setting systems in place for that, because this economic model is built around using one. We'll talk about where to spend time, invest time, and save time when it comes to your economic model. Your perspective on the economic model will be different. But at the end of the day, once I've built an economic model, I'll tell you, it asks me one question. How am I going to get those appointments? I know all variables are taken into consideration or solved in your economic model -1. How do I get my appointments? Well, that's why we have the second model. The lead generation model answers the question that the economic model leaves us with. Hey, how am I going to go get 40 appointments? What lead generation model do we need to build and systematize such that every single month you know and that you will get the right number of appointments. Gary says, big picture, we are going to understand one thing and one thing really clearly. Your database is your business. Now, here's what I love about this. He says building up the number of names in that database and a relationship with those names is really with the very core of what building a real estate business is all about. We are going to look at lead generation differently. A lot of us talk about lead gen activity. In fact, our organization does an incredible job, better than any, right? Really teaching lead gen activity and how important that is. However, what we need to understand is activity needs to turn into a model. We are going to lever out our lead generation hub and our lead generation activity such that that activity can be done, can be replicated, can be duplicated, can be leveraged. It's a process, but we need to ask ourselves, does our lead generation model get us the right number of appointments? And what I love about that quote, it isn't just the number of people in a database. And actually, it isn't just about the level of relationship we're in with our clients. It's how do we build a lead generation model that combines the number of names and the relationship. It's not either, it's not or, it's and. We need both. Now, here's what's going to happen. As you build up the number of names in that database, and we're going to walk you through exactly how to do that, right? Lead generation activity after lead generation activity after lead. We are going to build multiple legs to your stool in our 10-week program. The next step, the next thing that's going to happen is you're going to close some deals. And as you close transactions, you will earn money. And as you earn money, unfortunately, you're going to spend it all. Right? We're real estate agents. That's what historically real estate agents spend probably about $2 more than they make, right? So we're going to talk about the budget model. And self-proclaimed, this is my favorite model because it isn't a profit and loss. It isn't a balance sheet. This is a business building strategy tool. The budget model will inform us everything we need to do in our business. In fact, in front of you, you see page 157 of MREA. 157 of MREA. And what I'll share with you is anytime someone asks me a question, hey, when should I hire? When should I spend money on that? When should I? Page 157 of MREA answers that question. We'll look at a $6 million business, a $10 million business, a $15, $25, $40 million business, an $80 million business, right? We'll look at each business, and the budget model will help us make decisions around operations, around marketing, around education, around growth, around pulling back when we need to pull back. We'll set some profitability goals as well. We'll spend almost 2 weeks, right? 2 full calls on the budget model. Now, some of us love numbers and some of us don't, but here's my promise to you. If you sign up for the course and if you spend those 10 weeks with me, I promise by the end of those 10 weeks, you will love your budget, you will understand your budget, and you'll build a budget. Now, here's what happens. One of the most important questions that the budget model answers is when to hire and who to hire, which means we're building an organizational model. The fact is if we have an economic model and our lead generation model is working and our budget model is generating profit, then eventually we will grow into business owners that are talent scouts. It will be all about people. Every organization and every real business is. We will eventually move through the leadership levels of first just position, and then permission, and then production, where many of us gain our leadership grit, right? We are just production-based leaders. We are producing a lot of real estate. People look at us and say, hey, I want to be around you. I want to be part of your team because you're in production. Well, one day we need to step out of that and move to the 4th level of leadership, which is people development. And so as we tackle the organizational model, we'll talk about org chart, and we'll talk about compensation, we'll talk about role descriptions, and we'll share all of that with you so that you have a system and a model and the tools to build an organizational model. But we'll also talk about leadership models and people development models in that organizational model. One of my favorite things to talk about, and we'll spend about a week and a half on building that out together in our program. Here's what we know. Gary says that business is both an art and a science. right? The art is inspiration and motivation. I would say, right, and that's a direct quote from MREA. I would say that that's the willingness, right? How willing we are is going to be the art. You go to an art museum and some people stare at paintings for hours that I couldn't spend 21 seconds looking at, and vice versa. I can spend days in art museums, guys. I love them, but I can spend a day looking at a couple paintings, and people think, "What in the world are you looking at?" That's the art of business, right? We will get there as we build our businesses. The inspiration and motivation we have around it is the art of business. The science of business, what's science? Well, there's a process to that, right? There's fact in that. There's a scientific method that actually we'll cover in our 10-week program. The science of the real estate business is MREA. Guys, we need to learn the science so we can apply our art. And we'll talk and work through 10 weeks together of perfecting the science of the real estate business. So here's what I ask. Please join me. Please join me for our 10-week program, Model Your Way to a Million. We will spend about 10 weeks together. It is going to be 1 hour live every single week. Here's what I'll share with you. This is not a sit back and chill fast track program. This is a working fast track program. We will go through that. It'll be recorded, so if you can't meet with us live every single week, don't worry. You can listen to the recording, but we are going to have homework. We are going to really work through some heavy lifting. What I would say is this: we're going to spend an hour together every single week, talking about our business, working on the business, and then I will tell you as well, there will be some work after that. I will say typically you'll spend an hour, maybe two, every single week working on the business, but that's a habit that we need to create. The program starts on October 17th, so this is perfect timing. Why? Because in October, we should really be thinking about what 2019 looks like. We should really be thinking about what systems, tools, and models we need to make sure that our business is set up the right way. So I'm thrilled that we get to roll this out in October. Course will run on every Wednesday, beginning on October 17th for about 10 weeks. It is at 1 p.m. Central Time. You can check out more information about it by going to modelyourway.com. But I will say anyone that listens to this webinar, and you've had to listen all the way through to get this discount code, but we have a discount code for you if you sign up directly after listening or watching this webinar, and it's Web15. And that'll give you 15% off the total cost of the course. The total cost of the course. It's about $99 a month, or the total cost is $297. You get 15% off if you sign up now. But here's my ask. My part of my mission is to get people to realize that this book, these models, can change your business and change generational trees, right? My commitment to this book changed my business, right? I was in the business for a decade before I committed to running my business according to these models. And now for the 8th year in a row, we'll net a true $1 million, a true $1 million net. I'm no different. I just followed a different model. I committed to these models. And I told Gary and I told Diana and Tony that I would teach this until they told me not to, right? Which means I better continue to net $1 million, right? Because I'm not going to teach something that we're not doing. But it is a passion of mine. It is a focus of mine to get as many of our agents following the MREA models that are so simple, not easy, but so simple. So please join me beginning on October 17th for an hour. We'll cover a lot. I do talk fast, as you probably know by now, but that means we'll cover a lot of information in that 10 weeks, and you will have the groundwork and the foundation and have done all the heavy lifting that it will take to have a business that you can model your way to $1 million. Thanks for being on the webinar with me, guys.